Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Melissa Bostrom, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School. And today's Alum Zoom comes to you in co-sponsorship with the Office of Postdoctoral Services. I want to also say a thank you to Resea Clark-Cotton, who is co-hosting today's session, just in case there would be any kind of technical issues. So thank you so much to Resea for her leadership today. Today's session is part of our Alum Zoom series, and as always, we'll begin with a brief introduction of our featured alum and then open it up to our 5 career questions, and then we'll move forward into some of the questions you all have posted in the registration. But please feel free to post questions in the chat as we go, and we'll try to handle those as well as we speak. So let me turn now to introducing our alum who's featured today, Dr. Nora McGhee. She is Senior Program Officer at Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. PCORI is the abbreviation for that organization. Dr. McGhee received a bachelor's degree in biology from Oberlin College and a PhD in pharmacology from Duke. Since leaving Duke in 2006, Dr. McGhee has been a postdoctoral scholar at Penn State University College of Medicine, a value analysis facilitator at Penn State Hershey Medical Center, corporate manager of material clinical resources for LifeBridge Health, and manager of value analysis for Innova Health System. Dr. McGhee joined PCORI in 2014 as a scientific merit review officer, and since that time, she has been promoted to a senior manager of research awards and then to her present position as a senior program officer. So please join with me in a virtual round of applause to welcome Nora McGhee.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being with us. So we'll start with our 5 career questions. And the first one is, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Sure, I can tell you a little bit. You've really done a nice job of going over it already, but I can go into a little bit more detail. As you said, I got my PhD from Duke in 2006 in pharmacology, and my thesis work focused on cancer biology and drug targeting. And then I did postdoctoral work at Penn State Hershey. And at that time, actually, I was already sort of itching to get out into something kind of more applied and more translational, but my options right then were pretty limited. My husband was starting law school up in central Pennsylvania at Dickinson, and there aren't a lot of biotechs, or almost no biotechs up there. And the main business in town is the Penn State College of Medicine and the hospital in Hershey. So I was able to get a postdoc there and was there for a couple of years. So after my postdoc, again, I was there a couple of years and I really was not interested in doing another postdoc. And so I ended up getting a position in value analysis. So I can tell you more about that in a little bit. So I guess that's a little bit about my background before PCORI.
Okay, great. Thank you. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got your job, your first job at PCORI?
Sure. And this is kind of a long answer since there are several positions that led to it from my work at Duke and at Hershey that led to my position at PCORI. So as I alluded to, I was working at Hershey at my postdoc, and I hadn't published very much. And so I was kind of worried about getting another research position, and wasn't that interested in doing another postdoc at that time. And as I alluded to, there really weren't a lot of options up in Hershey at that time, and probably now too. So I was looking around and I started thinking about, why did I originally get into research? And one of the main reasons was I really wanted to have an impact on human health. I wanted to, originally I thought I'd be involved in drug development or something like that. And I thought, well, what are other ways to be involved in human health using the background I have? And I thought, well, it would be cool to work at the hospital. That's the main thing here. It's a huge building. If you've ever been to Hershey, it's this immense structure. I was actually already working there. The College of Medicine and the hospital are in the same huge building there. So I thought, this is the obvious other place to work, but how do I work there? I'm not a nurse. I'm not a doctor. So what I did is I sort of thought, well, what do I do? Well, maybe I should ask some people for some advice since I don't know what to do. And I think career centers often advise people to do this. And I used to think, oh, that's kind of silly. What's that going to lead to? But I asked people to do some informational interviews. I reached out to several of the top administrators at the hospital and asked them to do informational interviews with me. And maybe I was lucky, but, and maybe it did help that I was in the College of Medicine, so I already had a Penn State email address that might have helped rather than being completely from outside. But for whatever the reason, one of them said yes. And he was very, very supportive. We had a long discussion, and he sort of talked to me about the skills I had developed in my PhD and my postdoc, the skills I had developed, and really tried to probe me in terms of what else could I use those skills for rather than just bench research. And so that started getting me thinking about how I could apply those skills more widely. And he really, he encouraged me to rewrite my resume in terms of emphasizing those functional skills that could be translated to other areas. So I did that, and he looked at the resume for me. He provided me some advice on job openings that might be a good fit for me. I was really lucky because this was going to be a drastic career change outside of bench research, and to have someone that was helping me who was in a pretty powerful position at Penn State Hershey, I think was good. So I looked at what jobs were available, and really there were just a handful right then, and only one or two were even something that was at all something I could even think that I might be able to do without a clear, clinical license or something. And so I applied for a position in value analysis and ended up getting that. And so I can tell you a bit about what value analysis is about, because most people don't know what that is at all. So most major medical systems have a value analysis department now. And what they do is they work with both vendors and people inside the health system and anyone sort of who wants to either bring in a product or change a product for the health system. So this can be any type of one-time use device or supply for the hospital. It can be anything from a cardiac catheter to a knee implant to nursing exam gloves, anything, the whole gamut. So I was really lucky in this case because one of the main skills that I developed, and probably most of you have developed in research, is our data analysis skills. That's something that that is definitely stressed and developed. And that for this particular position, what they were looking for was someone to do kind of a deep dive into their data on the use of certain products and tell them, what products are we not using? They had a whole inventory of products on hand that they thought a lot of it's just sitting here. We want to get some money back, but we also want to have what we need for some of it they need to have for emergencies, for different trauma situations, kinds of implants they had, and they wanted someone to come in and analyze that. So because I had emphasized my data analysis skills on my resume and in my cover letter, they were willing to give me a shot because I was the person who would apply who really had emphasized that, and that's what they happened to need. I didn't know much about how the hospital operated, how anything about the surgical area, which is the area they wanted me to focus on in. But I learned that on the job. I came in and did data analysis for them and was able to save them several $100,000s in certain areas. I mean, it can add up to millions of dollars in savings. But value analysis in general is very interesting because a surgeon will come in and say, oh, I just learned about this new product. I want to use this instead of what I've been using. And then I'd have to figure out, what does this product do? I know nothing about it. So I'd have to learn about that particular surgery and what that product did and what we already had and compare them. So already I was starting to compare different products, which would eventually lead somewhat to my interest in what PCORI does. That's a very interesting area, and also could be, I have to say, is very stressful as well, because there's also a lot of pressure from the hospital management to have a lot of cost savings as well, because especially in terms of more commodity products, like I said, exam gloves and any kind of all kinds of commodities, you can potentially switch them out to save. We'd have savings targets of $25 million for the year or something. It's quite significant. At any rate, I found it very interesting. And so I unexpectedly. That was the main thing that was offered to me, and I took it, right? And it was very different from what I'd been doing before, but I thought it was really fascinating. So I ended up doing that for several years at several different health systems. First at Penn State Hershey, and then when my husband finished law school, he got a job down in Maryland. So we moved down to Maryland. So I was able to get a similar position, but a management level position at a health system down in Maryland, in Baltimore, and then ended up managing value analysis for a couple different health systems in Baltimore and in Northern Virginia. So I did that for a couple years. So as I said, it was interesting. And, but one of the areas I struggled with was, particularly for the very complex devices, it wasn't very clear when I would meet with the committees, should we allow this product to come in? Is it better? The new ones, they always said, oh, it's so much better than what we've had before. It was usually much more expensive. And I would try to look at the research and say, is there any research? Oh, sorry about that. My dog gets activated by lots of things going by. Anyway, so I would try to see, is there research comparing them? Is this actually providing a clinical benefit to the patients? And there's very little information comparing different devices out there. And what's out there is often research that's done by the companies. So it's suspect. There might be bias, of course. At any rate, so that was sort of in the background. And then I had been thinking, I really miss being in research in some ways. I miss the excitement of it, the discoveries, and all the interesting people that I used to be able to work with, really smart people thinking about questions and wrestling with them. It would be cool if I could be involved in that again. But, I've left research. I haven't been in years. So I just started idly searching for jobs, seeing what's out there, not really with a particular goal in mind. And that's when I sort of happened upon PCORI. And so I had heard about them a year or two before, but I didn't really know much about them. And so PCORI was created by the Affordable Care Act originally, about 10 years ago. And PCORI, so I can tell you a bit more about what PCORI does, because I've been there about 6 years now. And so PCORI funds comparative clinical effectiveness research. So that means that we look at therapies that are already known to work or are in widespread use, usually both, but sometimes something's been used for decades and it's never been officially proven to work, but everybody accepts it works. And we look at comparing them for a certain disease and see which one might work better for certain people is kind of the whole big idea. So we are late in the therapeutic approval and review kind of process. So typically, for drugs, they will have already gone through the phase 3 trials with the FDA and already be out in the marketplace, and people are using them. And so this sometimes happens for new drugs. So there have recently been drugs, say, for hepatitis C that have come out. They're very expensive. They're known to work in certain situations, but we don't really know how they compare to each other. Because many times in trials, drugs are compared to placebo. Or the trials are very highly controlled. Only certain patients are allowed in who don't have comorbidities. The setting is very, controlled setting. So it's not really that realistic for a lot of patients and their doctors to make a decision. So, so the types of trials we run are more real world trials, and we usually have kind of wider criteria for the patient populations we include. So, excuse me. So I have a couple notes, so I didn't jog my memory. So let's see. Oh, I did want to mention, so another main area of focus of PCORI that really, at least for a while, set us apart from any other researchers is that we have a big focus on the patient input. We are the patient-centered outcomes research institute, and we've kind of taken that to heart ever since we were authorized. So patients are expected to have a big role in the research process, which is kind of a paradigm shift, and is becoming more accepted kind of throughout the clinical research arena since we've been publicizing it and popularizing it. Really, we expect our investigators to involve patients at every stage of the research, including formulating the research question and deciding what the appropriate outcomes are to include in the study.
Wow.
So, I mean, when you think about it, it's like, that's obvious. Why haven't they been doing that all along? If the patients are going to use it at the end and decide, you know, do I want to take this drug or not? Do I want to do this particular treatment regimen? Well, they want to know, like, what matters to them. It isn't always the clinical outcome a doctor would have chosen. Sometimes it's quality of life or how many days of work they miss, something like that. So we want our investigators to talk to the patients ahead of time, do focus groups. Sometimes they even bring them in as co-investigators, and they help troubleshoot as the study goes along, and also help just come up with how the study results will be disseminated at the end. They're really supposed to be involved at every stage of the research. So that sets us apart.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so I ended up here at PCORI, and so the first job I ended up with was in merit review. So I ended up in merit review because they really look, and they still do, look for people with background in research, but it doesn't have to be clinical research in that area of the organization. And ideally someone who has some type of other administrative experience if your research is kind of more bench research, like mine was, and like it was for a lot of our merit review officers, actually. They want you to have done something else outside the lab to show you can interact with people. And I think that's something that I learned in my value analysis work. I got much more development of my people skills than I had when I was doing my cell experiments and my mouse experiments. So I think that's something that I had been a little bit afraid to do, that I was pushed to do in those positions, and it has really been an asset going forward that I can interact with people and in a more comfortable way than I used to. So I think that that's really what they were looking for. People with some administrative experience dealing with people and with an appreciation of the research process, but not necessarily people who had been doing clinical trials. So I fit that background, and they were interested. It ended up being a perfect fit, at least to come in with that, because I had the research background, and then coming from value analysis, I had the appreciation of kind of some of the clinical struggles that people are faced with in the hospital, in the health system, because like I said, we were trying to figure out which device people should use in a particular surgery, and you don't always have the evidence. And so ideally you would want to do a trial where you compare them. So I had an appreciation of some of the issues behind it and the research process. So that was a good fit. So I worked in value analysis for a couple years, and merit review for a couple years. And the merit review process at PCORI is fairly similar to what a lot of people might be familiar with at NIH with the study sections, reviewing applications for research funding. And the main difference is, as I said, we have a big emphasis on patient involvement. So we have patients who are members of our review panels. We have patients as well as other healthcare stakeholders, clinicians, physical therapists, dentists, nurses, payers, insurance company representatives, all kinds of other folks who have an interest in the healthcare process and who might have important insights are members of our merit review panels. So as a merit review officer, one of my main jobs was to recruit the reviewers. So as I said, that was utilizing my people skills. So I had to recruit the reviewers and then kind of coach them through the process, which some scientists obviously didn't need a lot of help because they were more familiar with how to review applications, though they appreciated kind of understanding the nuances of what PCORI was expecting versus NIH that most of them were familiar with. But the stakeholders, and especially the patients, often needed a lot of help kind of understanding what are we looking for in terms of reviewing the applications. We have review criteria, but sometimes they wouldn't answer do their written critiques fully. They kind of need some coaching along. Okay, you're missing this piece, or this doesn't make sense. Kind of help explain further what they were trying to get across.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of what I did in the merit review.
Sounds like a lot of teaching and mentoring, really.
Yeah, you could say that. Yes, definitely. So I did that for several years as a merit review officer, and then senior merit review officer, where I co-led the department. So we have the other side. So merit review is kind of one piece of what PCORI is doing, but another main piece of what PCORI does, obviously, is fund the research and kind of oversee the research for several years as it's being carried out, usually 3 to 5 years, the length of our research projects. So that's kind of the main program side of the house. That merit review has a bit of a wall with, there's interaction, but not a lot of interaction, because we want the merit review to be somewhat independent of the program considerations. So I was gaining knowledge of what was happening in that area, but I always kind of wanted to be more involved in, but that's really where the action is. Those are the projects that they fund them and then they manage them. But I still thought, well, I don't have the clinical background. Maybe I'm not a good fit for that. But there were a few people who had moved from merit review into the program staff and managing the projects. So I was interested in that area. And so what I ended up doing is I got a position for about 1.5 years that was sort of straddling the two areas. So I think that's been a theme, sort of, I've hopped along in different areas and moved into something that's sort of related. And then, okay, I'm interested. Okay, I'll move into something that's like somewhat related, and kind of do that one thing after another. And I think that's part of why I've stayed at PCORI so long, that I've been there over 6 years now, because I've been in several different positions, so it doesn't get boring. I figured out something, I get to be good at it, and then, I'll move to something else. So it's almost like I'm in a new organization. In some ways, I'm kind of getting, it's new challenges of a new position, but on the other hand, I have the historical knowledge now of what's been happening for years at the organization, because all along I have been involved in things like funding announcement development, and that kind of permeates a lot of what we do. So PCORI's only been around about 10 years now, so having been there 6 years, I'm now one of the old timers. A lot of the people have left. So that's an interesting position to be in. Anyway, I moved into a position that sort of straddled the two areas of merit review and the program side, where a lot of what I was doing was kind of a liaison between the two areas, communicating what the program needs were to the merit review and what merit review was struggling with, or what they needed more information on to recruit the right reviewers, things like that, or how the funding announcements could be optimized in certain ways, things like that. So I did that for a while, until about 6 months ago, I was encouraged to apply for a position in the program staff to actually be a program officer. And I thought, well, I don't know if I can do it, but I'll try. And it's actually been the most interesting position I've had so far, and I've been surprised I can do it. I think a lot of it is kind of, I understand now what type of research we do, and kind of have an idea of how it's conducted, because I've absorbed it over the years. So I've been doing that for about 6 months now. It's been very interesting. So that's how I got to where I am. It's a very long road, even though I'm not that old, but it's been a long road.
You've packed a lot into a very brief time, really. Since your time.
Yes. So before PCORI, I was only in my positions for a year, 1.5 years, each of them, and then in 6 years, I've been in several different positions at PCORI. Yeah.
You have been busy. Yes.
Keeps things interesting.
Well, let me let you get a drink of water and just rest for a moment, and just let me to everybody who's on the call. The start of that really impressive journey was an informational interview. And so I want to highlight that piece for everybody who's with us, because that seems like that was kind of the launch point for all the progression that you made. Yeah,
it was. I think that anybody who's considering a drastic career change should do that, in terms of getting more information about what you might be getting into, or if you don't even know what you're getting into. Like I said, I knew I had to stay there. I had limited options in that area, and I wanted advice on what might work. And just kind of, a lot of people like to give advice. So if you can ask them for their advice, they're usually happy to provide it.
That's right. Human nature.
Yeah.
So, Dr. McGhee, can you tell us a little bit about kind of a typical day in your work at PCORI, both pre and post COVID?
Sure.
Or I guess during COVID.
During. So I can tell you a bit more first about what I'm actually doing as a program officer, and then I can say kind of how I'm doing it. So as I alluded to, as a program officer, one of the things I do is I work with my colleagues to actually write the funding announcements that we post. If you go on the PCORI website and look at our funding announcements, we have funding announcements that come out at least 3 times a year in a bunch of different areas. We have some broad announcements that come out and some that are kind of targeted for specific topic areas. And so a lot of work goes into preparing those. So I work with colleagues to get those ready to go out the door, to be approved by our board and then to be posted. And then another big thing that I'm involved in is screening letters of intent. So before applicants can submit a full application, they submit letters of intent, which is kind of a sort of mini application. It's a few pages long, and they say what they're intending to do and go through kind of all the sections. And so we have a screening process because we only, we invite letters of intent. You can only submit an application if you've been invited to submit. Kind of the main thing is to save everybody the time and effort of going through writing a whole long application if it's not really a fit for what PCORI is looking for in general or for that specific funding announcement. So it's a lot of effort. Sometimes we get 100 or more LOIs, letters of intent for a particular funding announcement. And so it's spread a bunch of amongst a bunch of staff, but it's still a lot of work to go through those and see if they're a good fit and if we should invite them. So then once the applications come in, then they go through the merit review process. And right now I don't have much involvement in that because that's handled by our merit review department, along with the external merit reviewers. And then after merit review, it kind of comes back to the program side because then as a program officer, I'll be assigned a couple applications. Generally the best scoring applications or close to best scoring are ones that we prepare to present to a board committee, which is our selection committee. And we kind of ask them to approve to fund these applications. So we have to do presentations to them. And then it eventually goes to the full board in a public meeting for full approval and announcement. And so then after that, another big chunk of what I do is I actually manage the research projects. So I have a portfolio of research projects, some of which are kind of near the beginning, some of which are in the middle and near the end that I've inherited from other program officers since I just started a few months ago. And that can be more challenging, jumping in the middle of everything and trying to figure out what's going on. So I have a portfolio of funded research projects that I oversee. So I meet with the principal investigators every month or a few months to kind of check in and see how they're doing, if they're meeting their milestones, if they're having particular difficulties, and talk through them hopefully before they run into bigger problems to try to solve them. So those are kind of the main tasks I'm involved in. And so a typical day, I have to say, is filled with a lot of meetings and emails. Those would be the main things that I'm doing. And that hasn't changed since COVID. It's stayed about the same, since that can be done, in general, can be done from an office or, I mean, most of the meetings did used to be in person. At our organization, we've always had a pretty flexible kind of work from home policy and pretty good work-life balance emphasis on that, I'd say, which I really appreciate. So a lot of people already worked at home 1 or 2 days a week before COVID. So we were already set up, everybody had, or almost everybody had a laptop, and we have pretty good network access. So we were in a pretty good position when the pandemic came out and everybody got sent home in March. So we're all working from home now all the time, and all our meetings are virtual. I just wanted to note, sort of in contrast to some lab work, thinking back to what that used to be like. So my hours are pretty regular. It's like 8 to 9 hours a day typically, and I rarely work weekends and rarely have emergencies. So I appreciate that, and it's in contrast to prior work and research, I have to say.
That's very helpful context. Thank
Yes.
you. I want to just check with you. I know it's 11:30. Are you able to stay a few more minutes, or do you need to jump
Yes.
off for?
I can stay
Okay.
a couple more minutes. Yeah.
Okay. I will ask quickly.
Yep.
So our next question, what can postdocs and students who want to work in this field or explore it further do to prepare? What do you recommend?
Well, so it depends what field you're in right now. I think if you're in an area that's similar to the types of areas that PCORI is in, then you're already in a pretty good position. If you're in something like clinical epidemiology or biostatistics or other related areas, then you might be a good candidate for a program officer position already. If you have or are pursuing a master's in public health, you might be a good candidate for a program associate position. But if you don't work in one of these areas, particularly if you're kind of involved more in bench research, like I was, I think in general, you need to be kind of more open-minded and flexible. I'm not sure if you'd be able to work in at somewhere like PCORI right away, at least not in terms of a clinical research funder. Maybe in terms of a more basic research funder, you might be a good candidate. I would think I would just emphasize the types of things that I talked about that I did at the beginning when I did the big switch, in terms of thinking about your generalizable skills and emphasizing those on your resume, and think about doing informational interviews. And I'd say be willing to take something that's not a perfect fit, something that uses some of your skills that is somewhat interesting, and it might be more interesting than you think when you get there. Or if not, it might be a stepping stone to something else. Sometimes you need to kind of do a couple different jobs before you get to something. I think I'm at PCORI. I've been here 6 years. That's the longest I've been anywhere. And I feel like I've stayed so long partly because I really, really believe in the mission of what we're doing. And I think we're going to provide better information for patients and their doctors to really make better decisions. And it's a good fit for me, but it took me a while to get here. And so now that I'm here, I've been in several different positions. It keeps it interesting. And so you have to be willing. You might not find that right away, but you have a while. You can spend a year or two somewhere and then find something else that will use some of your newly acquired skills and your research skills, hopefully, kind of to build on that.
Thank you. That's great. What is the employment outlook like at PCORI given COVID? Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, I have to say right before COVID, a few months before, we were reauthorized for another 10 years. So in general, outlook is good for PCORI now. And I think just in general, I think there's more appreciation than ever right now for healthcare research in the wider community. And I think the outlook for research funders is very good, particularly at ones that are more generalist, such as PCORI, rather than focusing in maybe a very specific research area. We fund all kinds of research. So I think the outlook for those types of funders is probably pretty good. I think you're frozen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Let's see. Well,
do you want to take over?
He appears to be frozen.
Yeah, too bad.
So I might just step in as co-host at this.
Yes, go for it.
Because I think, yeah, because I'm now the host. Okay. So I do believe we've gotten through all of the questions that that Melissa initially asked. So I will just take this opportunity to thank you so much
Sure.
for taking time, and we really appreciate your perspective. I found it extremely interesting.
Thank you.
And
I'm happy to answer other questions if I do have some time, if anybody wants to ask me about PCORI or being a program officer or merit review officer or even value analysis, because I know that's an area people don't know much about either.
Well, great. So actually, since that's the case, maybe if anyone has a question, you could feel free to unmute yourself and ask that question, or put it in the chat if you're more comfortable with that. I was taking a bunch of notes, and something occurred to me that has now kind of slipped my attention. But if it comes back to me, I will ask. Oh, no, that's a comment. Looks like Melissa's back.
Oh, okay.
I had a question.
Yes. I'm not sure who that is, but Taylor.
My name's Taylor. I'm also in the pharmacology department at Duke.
Okay.
But it sounds like a really cool type of job that like is kind of the opposite side of what like we've been on, like trying to get grants, and
Yeah.
mission's really awesome. I was just curious because I'm not sure where I'm going to be next, because like you, I'm kind of like tied to my significant other as well, and we might not get to choose where we want to be. So is
Yeah.
PCORI only based in DC, or like do you know if there's other agencies that are somewhat similar that might be like nationally or anything like that?
Good question. We are based in DC. And there's a lot of research based around DC, of course, with NIH and Bethesda, and other funders here too. I mean, I think there are a few you can look at. There are websites with research funders listed. I think there are some based in New York, and maybe some other cities, a few on the West Coast. They're scattered around, but they do tend to be centered around, there are a bunch of them, especially, of course, the public ones and their nonprofits tend to be centered around DC. But I think that some of them may be open to remote work, maybe more so now after everybody's experience during the pandemic. So you might look at ones even that are based in DC and see if they're open to you working remotely.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
So Melissa, Dr. McGhee offered to answer any questions that anybody had, so that's where we are now. Actually, have you frozen again? Yeah, I think you have. Here's another question. Delisa?
I think I'm back.
Yes, I have a, oh.
Okay, Delisa?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
So when you were doing your informational interviews during your postdoc, what types of people did you reach, like how did you know whom to reach out for to look into options for clinical careers? Like what were their positions and how did you find them?
Sure. As I said, I was living near Hershey and I wanted to stay, I had to stay there for another year or two. So that really limited my options. If you're in another location, there'll probably be a lot more people to reach out to. So I really just looked on the website for at the medical center and saw who were the administrators, and they were all listed. And I don't remember if their emails were listed, but since I was already working in the College of Medicine, I could find their emails or guess them. I don't remember. And a strategy that I have used other times with a little bit less success, but my husband has used actually with success, is to look in the alumni database actually for your undergrad and grad school and look for people doing interesting stuff and email them, email lots of them. And that's actually how my husband got his first job out of law school. An alum looked at his resume and it was a direct hire position for the government, which is rare. So you can get past HR, avoid HR, and he got his job. So I highly recommend that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do we have time for one more question, Dr. McGhee, or do we need to let you go?
What time is it?
It is 11:39.
Oh, I'm fine.
Okay. There was one other question that came in through the registration, which is what is the most fulfilling part of your job? I think that's a great note to end on.
Well, I have to say my position right now as a program officer, I haven't experienced the whole life cycle of a project yet, like from beginning to end, managing a project. So I'll just speak on what I've been doing so far. So I really find it very interesting and fulfilling when we decide that we're going to fund an application, we're going to fund a project, and I kind of get to dig into it and figure out what are all the potential issues with this project, and that I need to ask them about things that I don't understand or that might not make sense or that just need further explanation, or they might need to fix part of it or add sites because this seems like it's a small sample size, something like that. I kind of dig into that. We send them, it's called a PCORI information request. We send them a long list of questions and they send us their answers back. And sometimes we have multiple rounds of that before we finally execute the contract with a revised research plan. So I really like digging into figuring all that out and kind of optimizing the project, hopefully upfront, to try to avoid problems down the way. I feel like that's where I can have the most input into how the project is going to go. Later, a lot of it is just sort of seeing what happens and trying to react. And I'd rather be more proactive than reactive. So I find that very fulfilling.
Well, that is a wonderful way to end the conversation this morning. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your expertise. This has been just a fantastic overview of your career and guidance for how our graduate students and postdocs might pursue a career similar to yours. So please, everybody, join me in a round of virtual applause for McGhee. And special thanks to Resea for jumping in there when Zoom sent me away.
Well, thank you all for the invite. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Please
have a nice day. Bye.
Bye-bye.